May 23rd, 1934, 15 minutes past 9 in the morning. A narrow dirt road through the pines outside Gibbsland, Louisiana. 6 lawmen have been lying in the brush along the embankment for many hours, swatting mosquitoes, rifles resting on rolled coats, and they are close to giving up when they hear it. V8 Ford. Running hard, the sound every police officer in 5 states has learned to dread. Across the road sits the bait, an old truck parked on the shoulder with a wheel pulled off, staged to look like a broken-down neighbor, because the man who owns that truck is the father of a Barrow gang member. And the meeting that arranged all this was never put on paper. The tan Ford slows. Inside it, Clyde Barrow, 25 years old, barefoot in his socks, eases down the road he has driven safely 100 times toward a family he trusts. Beside him, Bonnie Parker, 23, a magazine in her lap, by the accounts of that morning, half of the most famous criminal couple in the history of the United States. What happens in the next moment will be argued for the rest of the century. Whether any warning was ever shouted has been disputed by the posse's own men ever since. What is not disputed is the first shot fired by a Louisiana deputy named Prentice Oakley, which strikes Clyde Barrow in the left temple and kills him instantly, and the storm that follows it, roughly 130 rounds by the most common count, as many as 150 by others, poured into the car at close range until the Ford rolls dead into the ditch. The most famous manhunt in American history is over in under 20 seconds. And standing up out of the brush, unfolding his 6-foot frame, walking toward the smoking car with a customized semi-automatic rifle, is the man who has spent 102 days building this exact moment. His name is Frank Hamer. And the country that turned the 2 bodies in that Ford into immortal legends would spend the better part of a century getting his story wrong. You have to understand what Bonnie and Clyde actually were by 1934, and what they were not, because this whole story is a war between a record and a myth. The record shows 2 small-time Texas robbers hitting gas stations, groceries, and small banks for sums that rarely bought a month's freedom, whose real signature was not stolen money but spilled blood. At least a dozen killings by the common tallies, the majority of them police officers. The myth was manufactured in April 1933, when the gang fled a police raid in Joplin, Missouri, and left behind rolls of undeveloped film. The photographs ran in every paper in America. Bonnie with a cigar in her teeth and a pistol on her hip, Clyde posing against the car, and a depression-battered public, furious at banks and hungry for outlaws, fell in love. Bonnie mailed poems to the newspapers. The papers printed them. By 1934, the couple existed twice, once as a pair of exhausted, wounded fugitives sleeping in stolen cars, and once as celebrities more famous than movie stars. It took the myth machine 1 year to build them. This is the story of the man the state of Texas sent to end them, and of how the same machine then spent decades trying to destroy him. This is the true story behind The Highwaymen, the 2019 film with Kevin Costner as Frank Hamer and Woody Harrelson as his partner Mamie Galt, a movie made, unusually, as a correction. Flipping the camera from the outlaws to the hunters after half a century of Hollywood running it the other way, the film is faithful in spirit and soft in places, and the record fills the gaps. The lawman's astonishing real resume, the prison break that started the clock, the 102-day hunt, the secret deal that built the trap, and what it cost everyone who touched it. And the strangest chapter of all, the one that happened after everyone was dead, when Frank Hamer's widow took on Warner Brothers itself. So hold this question the whole way through. 6 lawmen fired on a car without, by most accounts, a word of warning, killing a 23-year-old woman who faced no capital charge in any state. Was Gibbsland an execution, or an arrest that 2 years of murders had made impossible? The posse's own members never fully agreed. By the end, you will have everything the record offers to decide for yourself. Start with Hamer, because everything about the hunt flows from who he was, and the real man makes the movie version look understated. Born in 1884 in Fairview, Texas, a blacksmith's son, Francis Augustus Hamer joined the Texas Rangers in the first decade of the century and spent nearly 27 years becoming the most feared lawman in the state. A huge, quiet, deliberate man who worked the border wars, the oil boom towns, and the bootleg years, surviving dozens of gunfights and carrying the scars of multiple woundings, with tallies that vary by teller and grew in the telling. But the resume's two most important lines have nothing to do with marksmanship. In the 20s, Hamer repeatedly stood off lynch mobs, credited with thwarting more than a dozen lynchings, a Texas lawman putting his body between prisoners and the rope at a time when that choice made him enemies for life. And in 1928, he took on the most dangerous adversary of his career, not an outlaw, but the Texas Bankers Association, exposing what he himself called the bankers' murder machine, a scheme in which standing $5,000 rewards for dead bank robbers had led corrupt officers to set up and kill petty criminals and collect the bounties. Hamer blew it open in the press at real professional cost. Understand what those two episodes establish, because the myth of Bonnie and Clyde needs its hunter to be a thug, and the record refuses. The man Texas sent after its most famous outlaws was, by the documented account of his career, the state's most stubborn enemy of illegal killing, whichever side of the badge it came from. When Ma Ferguson's administration purged the Rangers in the early 30s, Hamer went into retirement. It lasted until one January morning made Texas desperate enough to call him back. January 16th, 1934. The Eastham Prison Farm, the most brutal unit in the Texas system, the place where Clyde Barrow had served hard time and, by every account of his life, been permanently changed by what was done to him there. At dawn, gunfire erupts along a work detail. Clyde Barrow, running the operation from a nearby ditch where guns have been planted in advance, is breaking his old cell block allies out of the field, and in the chaos, prisoners Raymond Hamilton, Joe Palmer, Hilton Bybee, and a quiet Louisiana convict named Henry Methvin sprint to the waiting car. A guard, Major Joseph Crowson, is shot and fatally wounded. Mark the name Methvin. He is the least famous man in the escape car, and he is the whole ending of this story. For Clyde, Eastham was the sweetest act of his life, a raid on the institution that had brutalized him. For the Texas prison system and its chief, Lee Simmons, it was an unbearable public humiliation, and Simmons responded by going to see a retired ranger. The terms tell you everything about the era. The state commissioned Hamer as a special investigator on a salary of $180 a month, a fraction of what he had earned, sweetened with a share of reward money and one unusual clause, the right to claim the gang's possessions upon capture. And Simmons's instructions, by his own later account, dispensed with legal poetry, telling Hamer to put them on the spot and shoot everybody in sight. On February 1st, 1934, Frank Hamer started the car and drove into the gang's world, and he did not really come home for the next 102 days. Here is how the hunt actually worked, step by step, because Hamer's method was the opposite of everything the newspapers imagined. Step 1, the circuit. Studying every robbery, sighting, and stolen car report, Hamer mapped the gang's movements and found the pattern, a great loop through Dallas, Joplin, and northwest Louisiana, always hugging state lines, because in 1934, a state border was a wall that pursuing officers could not cross. The gang was not wandering. They were commuting. Step 2, the immersion. Hamer lived on the loop, sleeping in his car, eating where they ate, interviewing farmers and station attendants days behind them, learning, in his own later description, their habits down to what they ate and how they camped. He recruited his old ranger colleague Maney Galt, another Ferguson purge casualty, and the two aging lawmen simply became weather on the gang's trail. Step 3, the lesson of failure. Dallas deputies Bob Alcorn and Ted Hinton had tried ambushing the couple once before, near Sowers in late 1933, and watched their Thompson submachine gun rounds fail to penetrate the body of Clyde's V8 Ford. The gang drove fast cars that were, against ordinary police weapons, effectively armored, and Clyde carried Browning automatic rifles stolen from National Guard armories. The posse rearmed accordingly, with automatic rifles and heavy loads. Step 4, the human door. And this is the piece the legends leave out because it is not romantic. The gang had one fixed point in all that motion: rest stops every few weeks at the Louisiana farm of Ivy Methvin, father of Henry, the quiet Eastham escapee now riding with Bonnie and Clyde. Through Sheriff Henderson Jordan of Bienville Parish, contact was made with the Methvin family, and a deal took shape in meetings no one wrote down. Henry Methvin would be pardoned in Texas for his help. In exchange, the family would deliver the one thing no lawman had ever possessed: a place where Bonnie and Clyde would voluntarily be in advance. And step 5, the pressure of blood, because that spring the clock accelerated. On Easter Sunday, April 1st, 1934, two young Texas highway patrolmen, E.B. Wheeler and H.D. Murphy, rode their motorcycles up to what they thought was a stranded motorist outside Grapevine and were shot dead. A widely printed eyewitness account described Bonnie Parker laughing as she executed one of the dying men, an account later discredited, but the damage was total and permanent. Whatever public affection survived for the outlaw, sweethearts died at Grapevine. And when Constable Cal Campbell, a 60-year-old single father, was killed 5 days later near Commerce, Oklahoma, the hunt stopped being a Texas matter and became a national demand. And spare a moment for what those 102 days actually looked like from inside Hamer's car, because his few later comments and the accounts of those around him preserve the texture. Two men past 50, sleeping across seats in February, cold, washing at gas stations, running false plates of their own so the gang's spotter network of garage men and cafe owners would not flag them. Hamer kept notebooks on everything: the brands of cigarettes left at abandoned camps, the couple's grocery preferences, the pattern of which farm roads Clyde favored after a job, north first, then a wide arc east. He came to know his quarry with an intimacy that unsettled him, later remarking on the strange burden of learning two young people well enough to predict them in order to kill them. The newspapers imagined a duel of 6 guns. The reality was an accountant of human habit, closing a ledger one entry at a time. The call came on the evening of May 22nd. The gang was expected at the Methvin place. Hamer's 6-man posse, himself, Galt, Alcorn, Hinton, Jordan, and Oakley, took position in the pines along the Gibbsland Road that night. With Ivy Methvin's truck staged on the far shoulder, wheel off, the trusted landmark converted into a killing zone. They lay in the brush through the night and into mid-morning, and the official plan, as later described, was to take the pair alive, if possible. Then came the V8 engine, the slowing car, and the question that has never been settled, because the posse's accounts diverged for the rest of their lives about whether anyone called out before Oakley's rifle spoke. Oakley himself, by the accounts of those who knew him, carried remorse about firing early ever after. What the guns left behind ended every legal question. In the car, the posse inventoried what Hamer described as an arsenal on wheels: automatic rifles, sawed-off shotguns, 10 pistols, and around 5,000 rounds of ammunition, alongside, in one detail the record preserves with strange tenderness, a box of fishing tackle. Under his agreement with Simmons, Hamer claimed weapons from the car, the strange bounty clause of his contract fulfilled. And then America arrived, and showed the lawmen exactly what they had been fighting all along. Within hours, the ambush site and the town of Arcadia were mobbed by thousands upon thousands of spectators, and by the accounts of that afternoon, souvenir hunters swarmed the death car, cutting at upholstery, snipping locks of hair. One man reportedly stopped as he tried to take a trigger finger, the coroner working while a carnival formed around the bodies. The myth machine did not pause for death, it fed on it. The bullet-riddled Ford itself would tour fairs and casinos for decades, selling tickets. Bonnie and Clyde were buried in Dallas, separately, their families and the crowds enormous, and the wound counts from the coroner's tables running to dozens between them, entered the legend as one more shudder of glamour. One more figure deserves her honest paragraph, and it is Bonnie Parker, because the ambush's oldest controversy still turns on her. The record shows a tiny woman, under 5 feet, who wrote poetry, waited tables before Clyde, and by 1934 walked with a permanent limp from burns suffered in a car crash the previous summer. Carried by Clyde because she often could not walk unaided. No court ever established that she fired a fatal shot at anyone. She faced no capital charge in any state on the morning she died, and the most damning eyewitness account against her, the grapevine laughing execution, collapsed under scrutiny. She was also, the same record insists, a willing partner across 2 years of robbery and flight, present at a dozen killings, armed in the photographs by her own choice. Both facts are true at once, and the 6 men in the brush had no instrument that morning capable of sorting one from the other at 30 feet through a windshield. That is the real moral weight of Gippsland, and the posse carried it unevenly for the rest of their lives. The ledger of endings ran long and crooked. Henry Methvin got his Texas pardon, exactly as promised, and then Oklahoma, unbound by any deal, convicted him for Constable Campbell's murder. Paroled in 1942, he died years later on a railroad track, having passed out drunk, the trap's human door closing on its own hinge. Frank Hamer went back to a working life, some of it, the record honestly notes, as a strike-breaking security man for oil and shipping interests, the gray chapter his admirers skip, and he refused nearly every interview about Gippsland for the rest of his days, declining to feed the machine. He died in Austin in 1955 at 71. And that should have been the end, except that in 1967, the Myth Machine produced its masterpiece. Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde, one of the most influential films ever made, turned the couple into beautiful doomed rebels and needed a villain. So it took the name Frank Hamer and hung it on an invented buffoon, a preening lawman captured and humiliated by the Laughing Outlaws, an event that never occurred in any form. Hamer's widow Gladys and his son sued Warner Brothers for defamation, and the studio settled out of court, quietly paying the family of the lawman its film had rewritten. The Highwaymen, in 2019, was the industry finally filing its correction 85 years late. So what does the real story of Frank Hamer finally teach? Every episode we make about this era ends up being about the same machine, the one that turns blood into entertainment, and Gippsland is its purest case study because the machine got everything it wanted from both sides. It made legends of 2 prolific killers of policemen, sold their poems, their photographs, and eventually their bullet-riddled car. And then, needing a villain for the legend, it defamed the most documented enemy of unlawful killing in Texas history and had to be sued into retreat. The record underneath is smaller, harder, and more human than any of it. 2 damaged young people from the Dallas slums who chose the gun and were consumed by it at 25 and 23. A quiet Louisiana family that traded them to save its own son. 6 tired men in the brush, divided forever afterward about the morality of their own 20 seconds. And 1 aging lawman who studied, outweighted, and outthought the most famous fugitives in America, then spent the rest of his life refusing to sell the story. The Myth Machine offers everyone in it the same deal Bonnie took, immortality in exchange for the truth. Frank Hamer is the rare figure in our entire catalog who turned the deal down flat, and it cost him his name for half a century. History eventually paid him back. It usually does. It is just never in a hurry. If this story hit you, subscribe. Every week we dig into the true stories the movies only began to tell, and the truth is always heavier than the script. Drop a comment. Which story should we investigate next?